thank you, because you chose my book, The Grift, The Downward Spiral of Black Republicans, as a summer must read. And it really meant a lot to me. You've been saying so many positive things about the book. And to hear that from you really meant a lot. And I want to thank you. I'm so happy the book resonated with you, Mr. Johnson.
It was a great book. I am a political junkie. I love history. And so when I seen the book, I was like, wow. And after the first 5 pages, I was hooked. Why? My college senior thesis was Black political alignment. So I've been tracking why Black folks vote and the ways in which we do, why we vote as a bloc. Naeem Akbar, the psychologist, he talked about the theory of collective consciousness. And it's through collective consciousness, that shared historical experience, that automatically draw us to respond to the greater society very similar. And that's also in our voting behavior. So when I picked up the book, I said, yeah, this is a missing link that I've been looking for. I've always been a fan of Douglas. I've always questioned Lincoln because, Lincoln's famous quote for me, or infamous, how you want to put it, was that if he could have kept the Union together without freeing a single slave, he would have done it. But it's a white supremacist approach. And so knowing that and realizing that he had to be forced, pushed, and led to do the necessary things. In fact, we would have lost the Civil War, but for those Africans who were not citizens, so they were not African Americans, who was called contraband because they were seen as property. When Sherman or Grant's army came through, they picked up arms and they began to walk behind those troops, resulting in more victories for the Union troops, only leading to a conversation around strategy. And when the generals told Lincoln of what was taking place, they conceptualized, well, let's issue a threat to Jefferson Davis to get him to put down arms, and he didn't take the threat. So they issued the executive order we know as Emancipation Proclamation. So I normally say Lincoln did not free the Africans in the system of slavery. Those Africans took up arms and saved the Union. Once again, this nation owes us a debt of gratitude.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to do, because what you see the current Republican Party always say is the party of Lincoln. Frederick Douglass was a Republican. And one of the things I wanted to remind people is that Black Republicans, they were the first progressives. Yes. They were the original progressives. So when y'all talk about Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, Harriet Tubman, these weren't conservatives. And are y'all going to act like Ida B. Wells was a conservative? Frederick Douglass, how dare you mangle that history? As someone like Tim Scott, who's in South Carolina, some of the origins of the first Black Republicans in the House of Representatives, how dare you twist the history of Robert Smalls and Robert Eliot? And if Frederick Douglass is rolling in his grave, I mean, Douglass had the audacity to call out the President of the United States. I laid out in that first chapter, the audacity. Mm-hmm. And you don't see Tim Scott doing that. You don't see Byron Donalds doing that. When I feel like a Democratic president gets it wrong, I call them out. So that's one of the things I wanted to do, remind people of where we came from, why we switched, how we were kicked out of the party, and how it's been a downward spiral. It's been a long-term journey. I mean, the current GOP wouldn't even want Colin Powell in their party.
Absolutely. I mean, you laid it out when you said we're not linking Republicans with Doug's Republicans. I stood up. I literally boom, there it is right there. Because even when you talk about current Black Republicans, them understanding the significance and the difference between Lincoln and his political philosophy as it relates to our community, and Douglas and his political philosophy. Lincoln didn't do anything for us or give us anything. He was forced to act in the nation's interest and out of political expediency because Douglas forced a question. And that's one thing we have to stay focused on, that in this struggle, we call a freedom struggle, we have always stood up for ourselves and advance the ball. We have had allies, but some of those
Yeah.
allies had to be forced to do so, or it was in their interest to do it.
And you know what's interesting to me, Mr. Johnson, is that I think about black Republicans, even in the 60s, like Arthur Fletcher.
Oh yeah.
He is the architect of affirmative action. And the current GOP erases his work. Affirmative action was created by a black Republican. And the day
Mm-hmm.
after my book came out, his son called my show and said, I bought your book, Paul Fletcher. The first thing I did, I went into the index to make sure my father's name was mentioned. And he said,
Yeah.
thank you for honoring my dad because they erase him. They erase Edward Brooke. They erased Dr.
Mm-hmm.
T.R.M. Howard, who was an
Oh yeah.
abortion doctor in Chicago, who fought for Emmett Till, Emmett Till's mother as
Actually,
well.
who was in Mount Bayou before that?
Right, right. Mount Bayou of
That's
Mississippi.
right. It was Dr. Howard that brought to light Emmett Till. Of course, Emmett Till's mother saying, I want to show it, but the system of survival was this small community called Mount Bayou, Mississippi, that you talk about with I.T. Montgomery, who was a race traitor. But
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
that experience, Dr. Howard left Meharry, did his residency there, Taborian Hospital, but he was a freedom fighter and he helped create an infrastructure that led to Medgar Evers doing the investigation into Till's murder. That once he gathered information, he gave it to the Pullman porters on the railroad who took it to Chicago. That's how it ended up in Chicago Defender. That was our resistance. But Dr. Howard was a Republican. Why? Because in the South, Black Republican clubs was a part of our political survival. And he could not have been a Democrat in Mississippi. So you had the Memphis Republican Club, the Orlando Republican Club, the Charlotte Republican Club, New Orleans, because that's how we added voice to public policy, albeit shrunken because of the system of racism, but the resistance that we put up. We have a leadership program, and I tell people, and I start off and say, political parties are nothing but vehicles for agendas.
Yeah.
And we land through our collective consciousness in places where we can advance our agenda. Who's to say 20 years from now, we may be able to advance our agenda under another party label? So it's
Mm-hmm.
not about the political party, it is what is the agenda you're bringing forward.
Well, one question I have for you. This is probably a fantasy, but then I want to get more into where we are right now. I think it's October 18th. It's mid-October. Is the anniversary of Colin Powell coming out in support of President Barack Obama in 2008. For our younger listeners, they may not remember that was a big story because Colin
Huge.
Powell was a
That's right.
Republican. It was if there would have been social media back then, you would have had General Colin Powell trending. I have a vision. I have a hope. Madam Secretary Condoleezza Rice, who I highlight in the book, she grew up in Jim Crow. She knows the danger of our democracy. Reminds us that she is somebody who is experiencing the horrors of retracting rights and so on. I just wonder, wouldn't it be a great gift to America for her to come out in support of Vice President Kamala Harris, somebody who knows foreign policy?
Let me start with your scholarship. The way you navigated that conversation in that chapter, really laying out the difference between Colin Powell's philosophical beliefs and implementation of those beliefs compared to hers, it was beautiful. Because it didn't malign anyone, it was just direct. Here are the facts.
Right.
And when the question was posed, here are the responses.
Mm-hmm.
It was the clearest example of taking two individuals who were contemporaries and laying out their worldview through their choice of political vehicle, the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if the agenda is not about the collective whole of the African experience and the protection of our ability to be recognized and seen not only as full citizens, but full humans, that was a great example. And yes, it will be great because as someone who has studied as she is on international affairs, she
Yeah.
knows the international threat of the options of the table. As someone who've experienced firsthand growing up in Alabama, she should be able to recognize the community harm that will be caused. But as someone who professed to love this country, I tell people this election is not about candidate A or candidate B. It's whether or not we will have a functioning democracy. And that functioning democracy need to have the necessary guardrails of a social contract we call the constitutions, fully respected and implemented. And I don't know what else any self-respecting patriot of this country who believe in a constitution, who believe in the promise of democracy, what else do you need as an example of the time of standing up for our country, not a party affiliation?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it would be great if that
absolutely.
happens.
It would be amazing, right? And one thing about writing the book, I'm from Philly. I've had my own perspectives, but it made me love and respect, as complicated as it is, our democracy and even our Constitution. It made me
Mhm.
say, wow, look at the beauty of what Black people were able to do. They were able to reinvent this language of the Constitution and make it work for them. Show, hey, we are a part of this collective as well. And it made me fall in love with that, respect it in a different way. If Frederick Douglass could love it, who was formerly enslaved, then I
Yeah,
could love it. And that's why it's so valuable right now. And that's
yeah.
that's one of the things that I walked away with. Yeah.
In this time where, in order for the Constitution to truly apply to everyone who are citizens, we also have to be seen as humans.
Yes.
And what they did during slavery, they wrote a document and they defined citizenship and who had protections based on their concept of who was human.
Hmm.
And in that debate, when you talk about they're taking our jobs, they're eating cats and dogs, you do three things there. One, you raise the specter of xenophobia. Somebody from somewhere else is taking something from us. Two, you label racism by saying those Haitians, you put a black face on it. And
Hmm.
then you dehumanize by saying they're eating pets. Very calculated and strategic. Well, when the Constitution was designed and drafted, many of the signers did not see us as full humans, therefore, they could not accept us as citizens. But for the counting three-fifths for tax appropriations. Now we are in a space that there should never ever be space for anyone to question our human self, our human existence. And if one now that has happened, there's no denying that we have full citizenship entitled to equal protection under the law like everyone else. And all of the people you wrote about in the book and all the people who sacrificed to allow you and I to be on this Zoom right now and in this conversation, the things they did, the sacrifices they made, the strategies they employed to ensure that the promises would apply. We hold these truths to be self-evident that
Hmm.
all men are equal. All men and women are equal. And so I celebrate our history, our past, and the platforms that we stand on that was really built blood, sweat, strategy, tears, sacrifice that you, I, and others, especially someone like Dr. Condoleezza Rice, we need to honor by standing up for the right things, not about candidate A or candidate B. Will we have the promise of the democracy looking forward, or we will allow those to undermine all of that work, not only of Black folks in this country, but everyone who have upheld that document we call the Constitution?